This video is going to be part of two things: the kitchen sewing table and living with PAD, which is peripheral artery disease. This is going to be a Winnie the Pooh quilt for my grandson, and right now I have it draped over the machine I'm going to use, which is an 1891 white treadle. I'm having a word glitch. And the treadle's down here, obviously. The machine's under there. I have to wind a bobbin. I have to get the thread set up. But I wanted to start the video by saying, living with PAD, the main symptoms are, whether you've had surgery to correct it or not, your legs work for a certain amount of time, then the blood flow in your legs doesn't keep up, and you go into some pain. Then you rest, and the blood flow catches up, and you can start again. Treadling, what I was doing when that first started with my legs, I was doing anything. I think I was reduced to like 2 minutes at a time treadling. That was before my surgery. So part of this is going to be finding out how long I can treadle. But my point is, a really good project for this is a 1 yard square quilt. It's fairly inexpensive as well. You buy 1 yard of fabric, in this case Winnie the Pooh, and 1 yard of backing fabric. This is red, white, and blue stars. And batting. You can, for this, you can probably just get a crib size batting if you're going to buy it. You could also make your own batting. But the point is to keep it to 1 yard. Because that's my goal now, instead of 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. Is how much of the quilt do I get done in one sitting. And this is not hand quilting. I'm working on another navy quilt with hand quilting. But what this is one of the easiest ways to make a quilt. So you cut 1 yard of fabric on the top, 1 yard of fabric for the back, a batting. And what I have to do before I actually finish this is I have to now press this and pin it and make sure it's not going to shift. Then I'm going to put it in the machine. I might do a star pattern. I might do diagonals. I haven't quite decided yet. But let's say with 1 yard of fabric, it should only take me less than a half an hour, I would think, to quilt it if everything goes well with the machine. I'm not sure. I haven't sat down and just done 1 yard of fabric on a quilt to finish it in one sitting. But I'll have a better idea of that. Now, how many times I have to rest and give my leg a rest will be what I'm looking for, and how strenuous this is. I have a link that I've been adding to these videos, which is a recommended walking program from Allina Health. And what they say in there that my doctors hadn't mentioned was to add distance. So in a way, my treadling is adding some distance. If I want to walk a specific route and don't want to add the distance there, I can treadle a quilt and add it here. Now I'm going to use my right leg, which happens to be stronger. What I may do down the road, not too far away, is switch legs. Treadle half of it with my right leg, treadle the other half with my left leg. The point is to use your legs in almost a walking motion. It's almost the same thing. And I had brought this up with my surgeon before the surgery. So when I don't know what's in the machine right now, so I can't really hit the pedal. But I'm going to be going like this, which is almost the same thing as walking. So this is a therapy that you can do, or I can do, for living with PAD. Now, even if I keep the quilts at 1 yard, I can always make more than one of them in the same fabrics and then attach them together to make larger rag style quilts, attaching them just at the seams in a rag fashion. But this project is a 1 yard quilt of Winnie the Pooh. I'm going to use red thread because it'll go with both sides. I'm not sure how I'm going to do the binding yet, so I'm probably going to stitch right to the edges. And then if I were going to use either the front or the back as the binding, I would stop at least 1 inch in and then fold over one or the other to do a fold over binding. I think I'll probably end up adding a separate binding, so I'm going to stitch right to the end. But the first step is to get it pressed a little bit better and pinned. That's my phone with the pedometer app open, and you see it, I have 1,111 steps. That phone in my back pocket is not consistently adding steps when I treadle. So I have ordered a different kind of pedometer, but I just want to let people know if they're going to use a treadle sewing machine for exercise, the phone app type of pedometer may not work. And with the other type of pedometer, the clip-on type, you can put that on your sneaker, on your, I would think, on your hip. I had this in my back pocket, so when mine get here, I'll be able to tell you better which pedometer out of 3 types best records your steps when treadling. Okay, I have excuse me, wound a bobbin, using the bobbin winder on the machine. I'm using DMC I don't know, I forget, I think it's just a fancy machine and hand quilting thread. Variegated, it's reddish, red and pink, and you can see I've done a test on this piece. I wanted a little bit of a bigger stitch, and I loosened the tension a little. If you're using this particular machine, when you turn this to get the bobbin winder up to the wheel, this is a white 1891 white VS2B, unless Katie Farmer's book has come out and she changed it. I think she was going to change them, this one to a VS3. These move forward, the wheel moves forward, unlike the family rotaries, the white family rotaries, which move backwards. 1891, it sews a beautiful stitch. There's the back. So before you get to, I'm doing this for exercise, for PAD, or exercise in general, you want to have your machine ready to go, whatever kind of treadle machine you have. And I started to say, when you screw this in to get the bobbin winder up to hit the wheel, you don't have to tighten it all the way. The further you put it up against the wheel, obviously the tighter it's going to be to wind it. And it just barely has to touch the wheel to wind the bobbin. And so now I've got a bobbin wound, and I'm all ready to sew. I want to add some things here before I start treadling. I have the treadles, I have bikes, and I have walking. Now, because this is really based on PAD, which is peripheral artery disease, and a walking program. The other things, the bike and the treadling, you have to make adjustments too. Now, one of the videos that I had recommended about the Pinko pedometer, the man said he puts the pedometer on his foot when he's riding, on his sneaker when he's riding his bike. And so I looked a little bit further into that. And when you buy a bike, they do use your stride length to measure how big of a bike you need, the best size for you. But it doesn't line up exactly. They say it's equal to your inseam. So I have a 26-inch stride length when I'm walking, which I measured out correctly and everything. I have a 29-inch inseam, and I have two bikes. Both are sold as 26-inch bikes. The older Columbia bike has a length from the pedal to the seat, which is really the inseam, of 29 inches. But my newer bike, which does have a bigger frame, has a length of 32 inches. And yet I can ride both of them comfortably. So when you get into frame size of a bike and trying to use stride length in the same definition, it doesn't quite work that well. So I think with the bikes I would stick to an odometer, which gives you, instead of steps, it gives you miles, how many miles you go. And I'm afraid I may run into the same thing with the treadle. And it's all about, well, with a bike and walking, you use all the same muscles. Except with a bike, you're not bearing your own weight. So that makes a difference in the number of calories and all the other medical aspects. With a treadle, whether you're standing or sitting, you're really measuring how many times you move your foot. And it doesn't really equate walking. So I'm still going to do this video. I'm waiting for the pedometers, really. I bought the Pinko one, and I bought a vintage New Haven one. Now the vintage New Haven ones, they measure everything in miles. And that's what I'm going to have to decide. Do I want to know the number of steps I walk, or do I want to know that I've walked a mile? And if you get to the point where you are, okay, I walked a mile today, I think it needs to be kept to, I walked a mile today, and that the treadling and bike riding are considered additional exercise. Because in my case, mainly because the surgeon told me the most important thing to do was walk. I brought my treadle up with all of the doctors, and their response usually is any kind of exercise is good. But it's not the same as walking. Now the other thing I want to mention is, and I have to stop for a minute, this is probably going to be like forever. I walk some, I stop. I walk some, I stop. With PTSD, you do that anyway if you get into a pacing mode. You pace and then you stop. In my case, with my stride length, there are 2,400 steps in a mile. I'm trying to think why that is. There should be 5,280 steps in a mile. and I'm trying to figure out how I got to there were 2,400 in a mile for me. It's got to be because of my stride length. And I'm just going to pause for a minute. If you go online, okay, so I've been doing a lot of research and I'm trying to keep it straight. So it's recommended you walk 10,000 steps a day, which is it should be 2 miles. And yet, I think it's because of my stride length. At 2,400 steps equals a mile. And this is why, when you bring in treadling and biking, and you should do all the math yourself. When I walk 2,400 steps, I've walked a mile. So I've changed my goal. My goal used to be 6,000 steps a day, which would be like 3 miles, roughly. That's too much for me right now. I've changed my goal to a mile a day. Now, I started this walking about 5 days ago as kind of a new motivation for myself. And yesterday was the first day I walked a mile. So what I may end up doing is switching to the New Haven pedometers, which are the vintage ones. But the reason I might do that is because of the mile marker. In other words, if my goal is to walk 1 mile a day, then I may not need to really focus all the time on how many calories did I burn, how many steps is that. You know, maybe it'll end up just being healthier to walk a mile a day. And in my case, instead of 2 miles, because of the PAD. But I wanted to bring this all up here before I do the treadling. I think on the treadle I'm going to put the Pinko, which measures steps, calories, and all of that, pedometer on my ankle. I might also put the New Haven one on there. And of course, you have to have a fun aspect. So I like to treadle. So if I use either one of them really, and just look at the miles, and leave a pedometer with each treadle. And so I have a white treadle and a single treadle. If each one of them had a pedometer, I can say, oh wow, look, I've done 5 miles on my treadle. And the wheel size of the treadle frame, just like the wheel size of the bike, they all change the formula. So I don't think there's going to be one pedometer that can go from me walking to the treadle to the bike. So you may want to think about that. If you're going to use treadling or biking as a supplemental exercise to walking, the pedometer thinking, you're going to have to think about how it transfers. And the easiest way to do it might be switch to miles and keep a pedometer on the treadle, a pedometer on me when I'm walking. And with the bikes, it's easy to just buy a bike odometer and switch to miles instead of steps. But for me, I've changed my program to 1 mile a day, and realized when I measured out the steps yesterday, 8 times up and down my own street is a mile. That's all I have to do is 8 times up and down the street. And that brings in the dog. And my dog probably could use 2 miles a day walking. But the route I'm on right now has a total of 9 dogs that live on this route. The other day I walked it without the dog, just like I'm doing now, and almost all of them were barking at me. And that's a distraction for the dog. But more than that, I mean, I have every right to bring my service dog around the block, and they have to control their dogs. I ended up, and I'll make a separate video about this, the other day when the 2 rat dogs came flying out of their house, I would not have been able to stop them with just a noise thing. I had tried like a canned air thing. It's called Pet Correct, I think, and it's not loud enough to stop 2 dogs that are absolutely determined to rip something apart. And so what I've ended up doing is buying a citronella spray. I almost bought pepper spray, and I'll make a separate video on how that's going to work. But basically, if I have the cart with me now, if I had the dog and I'm just walking the dog, and this had happened with Cocoa Bean once, a pit bull came flying out of their yard and had his mouth right next to her neck, like within seconds. He could have killed her instantly. I had only had her like 3 weeks. And you know, when the rat dog thing happened the other day, I said, I'm not going through this again. I am not going to go through that again, where somebody else who's not responsible for their dog is going to hurt my dog. So I bought the citronella spray, but with walking, especially if you have a service dog, it comes into the whole equation. So in addition to the dog helping me, the dog needs exercise. So the 2 of us are going to walk these miles together. I figured out I walked about 3,000 miles with Cocoa Bean over 8 years. I had her longer than that, but both of us started to fail at the same time. So with Scout, I'm going to do it a little differently, and I'm going to keep track of the miles. And so if I had him with me right now instead of the cart, I would be walking a little bit more briskly, but I'd still be taking the same amount of steps. And these are all considerations you need to make with a walking program, especially if you do have a service dog. How much you want to do, how much is comfortable to do, what's reasonable. Like, if everybody else is recommended to walk 2 miles a day, if I walk a mile a day, I am acing it because of my surgery and my artery issues. I think that's good enough. I think a mile a day will keep me healthy. And these are the types of things you have to look at. If you're simply going to walk and not do treadling or biking or any of that, or don't have a service dog, then 1 simple pedometer is probably all you need. And you can count your steps, your calories. I'm going to split it up a little bit and may, like I said, go to miles. I figured out why I got confused over the 2400. It's 5,280 feet in a mile. My first search on Google was how many feet are in a mile, and it's 5,280. I have a 26-inch stride length, which cuts it down to 2,400 steps in a mile. Now, here's another reason maybe to switch to miles. I don't know if you can see that. It says I've gone 1,047 steps. Well, I had already done 343 or something this morning, so I should be at 1,200 because I know It's 900 around the block. What I have found out with the phone app is that it drops off here in the backyard. I walked 50 steps in the backyard yesterday, and it said I walked 2. I have the sensitivity set on high, and it should be picking up every step. So I don't know if it's GPS maybe falls out. I mean, that shouldn't happen, you wouldn't think. Maybe other apps are more accurate. But I have found that the phone app is not really accurate. I'm not sure about the Pinko, but I know the New Haven pedometer works with a weight. So every time you move, it adds a step. I'm waiting to find out if the Pinko is like that too. So if you are going to count steps, it would be nice if it was accurate. Especially if you're going to say, I'm going to do this 8 times a day, and you don't want it to have to go to 9 because it looks like you didn't do enough. You don't want any negatives. So the older pedometer, in my case, might be better because it's accurate, but those only do miles, not steps, as far as I can tell. A phone app is so convenient, but it may not be accurate. Now, I have a relative that uses their iPhone religiously for their health app and steps and miles and everything, and she hasn't had a complaint about inaccuracy. So I don't know if it's just the app I have, if it's the phone I have, if it's GPS. But typical of me, I'll probably go with the old-fashioned one, and simply because it's got a pendulum in it that moves when you move. How can it not work? And how can it not be accurate? But again, that has me switch to miles. It doesn't give me my calories burned, which I actually need to know right now, because I have to gain weight, not lose weight. I have to gain weight. It's been saying that one walk around the block like that is, I burn off like 40 calories. And it would seem like I burn off more calories than that. But I have to watch that aspect of it. In other words, I have to eat much more, take in much more calories the more I do this. So the modern digital apps are wonderful resources, but if I just want to know I walked a mile for PAD, or treadled a mile, or rode my bike a mile, the bike I'd use an odometer and go by the wheel size, and the treadle is kind of in between because you're just moving your foot, really. But walking a mile, if that's my goal, I may only need one that says, okay, you're halfway there. They do quarter mile, half mile, and now that I know how many of my steps are in a mile, I'll know how many steps I took. So I think I could easily switch to a mile pedometer and still figure out the information I might need. And calories, I've started reading food boxes. I thought I was pigging out with Stouffer's. And a lot of the Stouffer's, maybe they're high in sodium, but a lot of the Stouffer's dinners only have like 280 calories. That's not enough to live on. So it entails a lot to look at this, but it's 2 or 3 definitions you need. How far are you walking? What's your calorie intake? How much are you burning? And when you get to the point I'm at, what's the distance that you walked? I've already figured out how many steps. Now I might be able to just say, I just need to walk a mile. Yesterday the pedometers arrived, and yes, you're still seeing me walking with my cart and not treadling. The pedometers themselves arrived yesterday, and what I think I've figured out is it all really focuses on stride length. So I took a walk yesterday afternoon with the Pinko pedometer and 2 of the New Haven antique pedometers and my phone. And one of the New Haven pedometers, the screw on the back, the adjustment screw, is too loose to keep the count accurate. The other one seems to be working, and I'm testing it again today. I have it on me today. Right here. But no, now it's not working. They have a little screw on the back. This should be showing 1/4 of a mile at this point, and it isn't. They have a little adjustment screw on the back. And I think what happens, it's a beautiful pedometer, but I think what happens is that screw becomes loose and the needle moves. So it doesn't hold an accurate count. The Pinko, which is right here, is working very well. But even this, what I did in the house, I walked around inside the house 100 steps, and the Pinko counted 44 of them. And so I was sitting there last night. I know my phone app is off a little bit, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I've got all these pedometers and none of them seems to be really accurate. And that's why I think it's stride length. I have to wait for a car to go by. I think the Pinko dropped off steps in the house simply because, like, I walked into a room, turned around, and I counted, like when I turned around, I counted the 3 steps it took to turn around. They weren't 26 inches long, which is my stride length. So I think basically pedometers are meant for brisk walking like I'm doing now. I don't know if it's going to work on the treadle at all. I think the only way to have a mile counter on the treadle might be to somehow attach a pedometer to the small flywheel. To the flywheel. It's smaller than like a bike wheel. And have the treadle be like a bike that has an odometer. I don't think it's going to work with just moving my ankle. And that the reason these pedometers have you program in or set them for a stride length is because that's what they consider 1 step. So I thought of reducing my stride length in the Pinko a little bit, but then, you know, at this point, I'm micromanaging. So the way I'm looking at it now, I'm going to use the Pinko pedometer for the most part. I have another New Haven one coming, but if that screw loosens up, I'm not sure they're going to work, and it may just be age. And I don't mind that I bought them. They're beautiful little antique instruments. But I'm going to use the Pinko, and I'm going to go by what the Pinko says. Because I walked 100 small steps, it equaled 44 26-inch stride steps. So I'll put it on my ankle with the treadling, but I'm not sure it's going to do anything. Which means every time I have brought treadling up with the doctor, this is why they say it's really better just to get out and walk. But we'll see how that goes in a little while. Okay, so I'm back in the house. This is the box for the Pinko. And these are 2 of the New Haven 100-mile pedometers. And it's really a shame that they don't work. And I put a note in with each one. This one did not hold an accurate count. going around the block. This is basically where it was before, just under a quarter of a mile, and it should be up to a half a mile. But the back of them, I can show you. It's almost, you almost have to be at a yard sale and look at them and hold them before you know whether they're going to work or not. This is the screw on the back that changes the hands and allows you to reset it. And it's so sensitive that I was wondering, this one's not as sensitive. Even if it rubs against something on the back, it might change the count. So it is a shame also when you open them up, you can tell it was made by a watch company. New Haven Clock Company is the name of the company. And it really is a precision instrument. It's just that I think they've aged in some way, that they just don't hold a count. So the Pinko now says 1,600 and something feet, steps, and the phone app, which I had in my back pocket, says 1,300 something. So that's a huge difference between the two of them. And I'll just show you the Pinko. I think I'm going to end up using this. This is the clock. It's 7:26 in the morning. You push the middle button. That's my steps. Distance is 0.66 miles. I burned 44 calories. And we're back at the clock. And then the only drawback I see to this, well, there are two. It doesn't have a backlight feature. So it's hard to see in the dark or dim light. And it doesn't keep the memory. It's not cumulative. Every night at midnight, it's going to wait. It resets itself to 0. So in the evening, I'm going to remember to write down how many steps or how many miles if I want to remember them. So I'm going to clip this on my foot. Let's go to the steps. It says 1631. And I'm going to clip it on my sneaker and use the treadle and see if it adds any steps. If it doesn't add any steps, then I don't think these types of pedometers can be used to measure how much you treadle. I do think it goes by stride length, and that's why there's a difference between the phone app and the Pinko app, because the phone is not sensitive enough to pick up each stride. So that's about 15 movements of my ankle. And that's what I was afraid of. It still says 1631. It does not consider moving your ankle like that an actual step. So, at this point, I would have to, like I said, treat the treadle like a bike and hook up some kind of a little odometer on the wheel. With a sensor, a bike, I might be able to put a bike odometer on there to figure out how many miles I treadle. But the Pinko pedometer, I think, is really for walking. And because it's easier than the phone is great. It gives you cumulative and little rewards and stuff like that. But if I just need to know that I've walked a mile, I'm going to use the Pinko. I'm going to continue with this video. It's already about a half an hour long, and some of it is just my thinking and how I came to the conclusions I did about the different pedometers. but I'm going to continue with it through starting the treadling for the quilt for a couple of reasons. One, in the winter time, it's actually not often it's not safe to walk anywhere because of ice, snow, plows, you know. So you're going to have to think about backup ways of exercising, such as a treadle. That's one thing. And the other thing is, the doctors never told me this wasn't a good way to exercise. They just said it's not the same as walking. So we're going to explore this, and I had said I was trying to decide whether I needed to know how many steps I walk or how many miles. This is a bike odometer. It's a cyclocomputer. It's very similar to a pedometer, except it gives you only miles. It gives you other trip information. Let's see if they have it in English. Speed, traveling time, auto start stop, setting how big your wheel is, hours in the day, average speed, trip distance, manual start and stop, maximum speed, total distance, LCD auto clear, scan, kilometers or miles, maintenance alert, 15 functions. So I used one of these all the time when I used to ride everywhere all through town. This is what a treadle would need, and I just wanted to show you what they look like. This is a sensor that basically you attach to a spoke on your wheel, or it actually goes on the frame of the bike. And if this is like my old one, part of it goes on the frame, the other half goes on a spoke, so that every time the spoke goes past the sensor on the frame, it counts one wheel turn. Then this mounts on your handlebars usually, and this slides into that bracket to hold it. And so if you're going 10 miles an hour, you'll know it on your little screen. So the same setup would be needed for a treadle, and on this particular one, so the sensor would have to go like right here, and the other half of the sensor would have to go on the wheel. This is about a 13, maybe a 14-inch flywheel, so that every time the treadle wheel went around, then you'd have to run the wire safely up here somewhere and just keep it on the top of the treadle instead of on your handlebars. That's how you would find out how many miles you're going on a treadle. These are fairly inexpensive, $10 to $15 for the cheap ones. They can get very expensive at a bike shop. I probably paid about $15 for this one. It's not really, I don't think it has a brand name, just made in China like everything else. Sundig, Sunding, Sundig.com. So that's that. Now, because right now I need this for one of my bikes, what that brings you to is switching to how much time do you treadle. This is an egg timer, and it on the average, it should take most people about a half an hour, I believe, to walk a mile. I think that's what I was seeing. So 30 minutes, if you figure 30 minutes is walking a mile, then 15 minutes would be walking half a mile. So you can use an egg timer, and this again is all based on dealing with and living with PAD, which is peripheral artery disease. So if you take a 1-yard quilt 1-yard square quilt. You set your timer for 15 minutes. You then have several, probably 15-minute sessions of making a quilt. And instead of how many steps it took, you won't know how many calories you burned. It'll be time increments of how, to most people, it would be how long did it take me to make the quilt. But with people with PAD who are using a treadle specifically for exercise, if I know it takes me 3 15-minute time periods to make a quilt, and then at some point it takes me much longer, I know my legs are not doing as well. So it's still a gauge to how well you're doing. The most important thing is that you're still exercising in some way. So I'm going to go ahead and start to quilt the quilt I had started. I'm going to use this as a method of exercise for PAD, and I'm going to use 15-minute increments. And is it equal to half a mile? I don't know. And unless I hook up an odometer, I probably won't know. But because this is already structured as additional exercise over and above walking, I think it'll be worth it. And then if it's pouring one day and I only walk half a mile, then I know if I do more time on the treadle, at least I'm making an effort, even if it's not regular stride walking. And the video is long, but if you listen to my thought process through this, all of these, walking, treadling, and biking, should really be more similar than it works out when you figure walking alone is really your walking stride. By the way, the Pinko pedometer is actually more accurate in the house now, depending on how I walk. Like I said, if I walk across the room with 7 regular steps, it counts 7. If I'm taking smaller steps because I'm turning around or something, it's not going to pick them all up. So all of this is based on walking stride, and that's just not going to happen on a pedal like this, and that's why it has to go to an odometer. And for me, it's easier to think in time increments. So possibly 15 minutes of treadling will equal half a mile. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I have the quilt in the treadle. I'm setting the egg timer to 15 minutes. I'm not going to, make you watch me treadle for 15 minutes. But I'm taking the Pinko pedometer and I'm putting it on my sneaker. And I'm going to start treadling, and I think we're going to find out the same thing as before, that it's not going to add any steps. So let's just check. The steps now are at 24:14. And that means I've already walked a mile today. So I have a little bit more testing to do on the pedometers and step counts, because I really should have another, according to what I was doing with the phone app, I should need to do at least another 300 steps. But this one is now, the Pinko is now picking up what I've been doing in the house. It added 200 steps. And that surprised me, but I realized I had been doing stuff around the house, and it was actually adding the steps as I did it. I may have already walked a mile. And each of us will have to do these kind of tests with the equipment or the pedometer that we have. I'm going to move that out of the way. And make sure the flywheel is engaged. This is from when I wound the bobbin the other day. There we go. And I have the pedometer on my sneaker. Now, I have pinned this quilt quite a bit, and you can see I'm working on the side with stars and stripes as a quilt guide, as opposed to all the Winnie the Pooh guys on the other side. And I know that I'm in the center. My pins are on the other side, so right here where there would be a pucker, I want to grab that pin out of there and smooth it out a little bit better. If you hear a dog in the background, that's actually my neighbor's dog, who seems to be home alone for a while. Now here's another little pucker. Even with a yard of fabric, you're going to run into, I've got the ends pinned, the edges pinned. Normally I would have started in the center and it would have worked out outward as you quilt, but I wanted to get one seam, one line of quilting straight across so that it doesn't shift. And probably what I'm going to do from this point is work from the other side, but I wanted at least one line of stitching to line up with the stars, because I'm not sure of the quilting design I'm going to do. I do have a lot of pins in this, and both fabrics are cotton. And I just want to, as with any quilt, you want to keep it straight as you do it. And I've already ordered blanket binding, so I'm going to quilt right to the edge on this. Make sure there are no no, so that's fine. Wanted to make sure there weren't any crinkles or folds on the other side, and there aren't. So that's just one line of stitching on this quilt, treadling. And let me 2419. I forget what I said it was before, 2412 or something like that. So the Pinko pedometer is not going to add steps to treadling, and like I said, if you're going to treadle, you will have to use a pedometer setup. And that's about normal, how I would have quilted that. And I set the timer for 15 minutes, and I've got 7 minutes left. My leg doesn't hurt at all. So I would say it's a minimum of 15 minutes that you could treadle at each time period, at each sitting, to work on a quilt as an additional exercise for PAD. Okay, I have a general idea now of how long I can treadle before my leg hurts a little bit and I would have to stop. And I can also tell you the very simple quilting pattern, quilting design that you can do on a 1-yard quilt that makes this a simple and fairly fast project that you can do anytime you want for PAD. You see quilting lines that are about 1.5 inches distant from each other. I had done the one line the length of the quilt, and then I did another line horizontally the other direction. So I ended up with a big cross in the center of the quilt, and now I'm working from the center outward 1.5 inches at a time. So far I've done 2 15-minute sessions of quilting. That's when my leg started to hurt, and that's when I'm stopping, even though I'm in the middle of this. I'll probably finish that one. But I have, there's like 15 inches to the right here still to do, which will maybe take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably take another 2 15-minute sessions. But then this half of the quilt is done with the quilting in that direction. Then I flip it around and work from the center to the other end 1.5 inches apart. When I get the whole thing done, this is, I guess, top to bottom. When I get the whole thing done with these stripes of quilting, I then turn it the other way, which would be side to side if you're gonna designate it that way, and do 1.5 inches apart this way. And the reason I decided just to do a plain grid pattern like that is because it's good for kids. This is a kid's quilt, but it gives you, I'll have 1.5 inch squares, and that makes the quilt fairly flexible. And with a little kid, it'll be his blankie. But also for an adult, that's enough to make it a really comfortable quilt. So when I start going in the other direction, I'll start here and work from the center outward 1.5 inches at a time going this way. And I think that I'm not a doctor or a medical professional or anything, whether you have an odometer on your treadle or not, and I may end up putting one on there. It takes a half an hour to walk a mile, basically. And coincidentally, I'm finding out that after 2 15-minute sessions, my leg is hurting. So I'm going to listen to my body, and I'm going to do this 15 minutes at a time, or 2 15-minute sessions at a time. And it gives you, a lot of times if you're making a big quilt, you think, oh my gosh, that'll take me 3 hours. And all the shifting and the managing, and your body prepares for all of that because it's hard work a lot of times. But with keeping it to a yard of fabric, a yard size quilt, and a very simple grid pattern, this is now something that I can just roll up on top of the machine, until I feel like treadling for 15 minutes. And these projects, if you do it a yard at a time, it's also fairly inexpensive. A yard of fabric on sale twice, and a piece of batting, or an old blanket, or an old piece of flannel for the batting. So this is something that you can use for PAD to keep